Hi guys, PJ here. Hope everybody's doing good. I was just gonna read you this article in the Trains magazine from September 2008, which I found at the Shanli train station after the model train show a few weeks ago. It's about the disaster of the Amtrak train back in 1993 in Alabama. So here goes. Very powerful story. Destruction of the Sunset Limited. An Amtrak conductor recounts the deadliest Amtrak disaster of all time when his train plummeted into Alabama's Big Bayou Canot. By Gary Farmer. At 12:55 a.m. on September 22nd, 1993, Amtrak train number 2, the eastbound Sunset Limited, blasted through the night across the foggy bayous and lush streams of rural South Alabama. Earlier that evening, motor vessel Movilla departed Mobile, Alabama, pushing 6 barges, lined 2 abreast, heading east on the Mobile River. The captain, a pilot, relief captain, and 2 deckhands were aboard. Later that night came the worst train disaster in Amtrak history. 47 people from the age of 2 months to 78 years lost their lives, including 3 engineers who were longtime personal friends, and 2 onboard attendants. In a quirk of fog, timing, and fate, the Movilla's tow barges nudged into a railroad bridge, slowly but powerfully knocking the bridge 38 inches out of line just as our passenger train approached. Before the crash, our crew included engineers B.R. Hall of Alabama, Mike Vinnet of Louisiana, and Ernie Hess of Georgia. D.K. Thompson from Mississippi and I were the 2 assistant conductors. We reported for duty in New Orleans on September 21st at 9:30 p.m. Being single and having the desire to see the country, I transferred all over the Amtrak system, working with Ernie in Atlanta, BR in California, and Mike and DK in New Orleans. The Sunset Limited pulled into New Orleans at 10 p.m., ready for the usual chaos of disembarking and taking on new passengers and crew. Because of a malfunctioning air conditioning system on one of the coaches, the Sunset departed 30 minutes late, but we were confident we'd make up time along the road. Meanwhile, the Movilla was making slow progress. After slipping away from Mobile, the captain retired for the night, leaving the boat in the pilot's hands and 1 on-duty deckhand. Visibility was good, and no problems were anticipated. We also had no problems after short stops at Bay Street, Lewis, Gulfport, Biloxi, and Pascagoula, Mississippi. We pulled into Mobile running late, but making progress. While in Mobile, as was usual custom, I called the engineers and told them to meet me at the baggage car for some coffee and donuts. Since the engineers are basically sealed off from the rest of the train, it was a welcome invitation. We departed at 2:33 a.m. Our next stop was Pensacola, Florida. At 2:15 a.m., Willie Oldham, the pilot of the Movilla, radioed the captain of a boat 2 or 3 miles ahead, asking about visibility. His concern was mounting as the fog became more and more dense. The captain of the forward boat replied that he was shut in, meaning 0 visibility and running on radar. Oldham, inexperienced on radar was not required for pilots to learn at that time, started looking for a place to tie up until the fog lifted. Meanwhile, we cleared downtown Mobile and the freight yards to the east and picked up speed as we passed over the drawbridge at the end of the yard. The bridge tender radioed as we passed. Highball, Amtrak! 15 miles of laser straight track running above swamps and crossing numerous bridges, spanning small streams and wide bayous lie ahead. Speed on this stretch was 70 miles per hour, and we made every bit of it. Trouble begins. On the Movilla, Odom couldn't find the tree to tie up onto. In desperation, lost in the fog and unsure of his surroundings, he ordered the deckhand forward in hopes he could see more clearly. Just as the deckhand was leaving, Odom saw a line on the radar screen that indicated a solid object dead ahead. The deckhand and Odom breathed a sigh of relief. Odom slowly inched his way forward through the fog, heading for what he thought was another line of barges on the bank where he could secure his barges. At 2:45, he nudged against CSX's Big Bayou Canot Railroad Bridge. Not barges. Odom didn't realize that he had lost his path and entered unnavigable territory. The crash. Hey Gary, thanks for the coffee and donuts at Mobile. And clear signal at Bayou Canot, Engineer BR called. Clear signal at Canot, and any time on the supplies for you guys, I replied. Those were the last words I would ever hear from my friend. When working together in California, we spoke truckers' talk, as we called it, just to confuse the railroad crew members who were already mystified by our southern accents. He was a great guy. As we rocketed along, I turned to DK and commented on how smooth the night was going, that it looked like we would be on time into Pensacola. He agreed and went back to his paperwork. The captain of the Movilla, Andrew Stabler, awakened by the bump with the bridge, arrived on deck to find half of his barges floating loose in the bayou. Because of the fog, neither man on the towboat could tell just what they'd hit. They needed to get their barges lashed back together immediately. Seconds later, the Sunset Limited, led by a P-40 locomotive number 819 and two trailing F-40 PHs, flew through the night at 72 miles per hour and slammed into the end of the girder bridge that the barges had pushed. The impact destroyed the bridge. The lead locomotive, still coupled to the second locomotive, flew nearly 150 feet through the air and slammed nose first into the muddy marsh. The second unit, acting as a 70-ton pile driver, drove the lead unit into the mud so deep that only the last 15 feet of lead unit was visible. Then, the second unit flipped around and exploded. The third engine, baggage car, dome car, and two passenger cars flew off the right side of what was left of the bridge and crashed into the bayou. The fuel tanks on the engine exploded and fire quickly spread through the baggage and dome cars, threatening the passenger cars laying next to them. The second passenger car landed in the middle of the bayou and immediately started taking on water. On impact, the entire train derailed, and only the resistance of the steel wheels chewing up the soft wooden tires kept the rest of the train from sliding off the remaining part of the bridge and falling on survivors below. Moments earlier, I reflected on my good fortune to hold a permanent assignment with such a great crew. Then the world blew up in my face. It was like flying along at night and suddenly, with no warning, hitting the side of a mountain. DK and I were slammed into the dining car booth tables, where we were sitting with enough force to knock the tables free from the bolts that held them to the floor. The car was rocked with 3 or 4 more quick hammer blows as the car bounced off the side of the remaining bridge girders. I watched with astonishment as the dishes in the kitchen actually floated in midair, still neatly stacked together before flying nearly 30 feet and smashing against the forward wall. Suddenly, all was quiet. I sprang to my feet, pulled DK from beneath the table, found my handheld radio, and immediately began calling the engineers. But I knew they were gone. The impact was too great. I hope to this day that they died on impact and didn't suffer any pain. At 2:56 a.m., my frantic "Mayday! Mayday!" calls were heard at the CSX Mobile Yard Office in Mobile, and they notified the authorities. I didn't know if anyone could hear the calls because of the short range of our small radios. So DK and I, along with the surviving crew members, set about rescuing the remaining passengers from the dark waters below us. As I regained my footing and some of my senses, my mind flooded with questions. What the hell did we hit? Where were we? Why won't the engineers respond to DK's frantic radio calls? I knew we were on a bridge, so the only way to evacuate the train was through the cars to the rear. I yelled to DK that I was headed toward the front and would send the passengers back to him. DK still frantically yelled into his radio for the engineers, calling each by name and hearing only silence. The rescue efforts. Aboard the Movilla at 3:05 a.m., the captain radioed the Coast Guard saying he lost his tow and needed assistance. At 3:07, he reported a fire and explosions on the water in the distance. It hadn't dawned on the crew of the Movilla that they had hit the railroad bridge at Big Bayou Canot, and that the fire and explosions were the death knells of the Sunset Limited. Only when the Coast Guard broadcast the news of the crash and requested all vessels to render assistance did they realize the enormity of their actions. Heading for the front of the train, I grabbed the train attendant, still stunned and disoriented, and said, "Follow me." We ran through the observation car, empty because of the late hour, to the rear door of the first coach. We forced the sliding door open because the air operating system had failed. I grabbed the loose fire extinguisher and used it to prop the door open. Inside was a scene of utter chaos. People were strewn all about the coach, some lying in the aisle, others underneath seats, and still others collapsed in each other's arms. Mothers called out to their children, husbands to their wives, and all looked to me for direction and answers. I told the attendant to stay by the door, and I began sending people to the rear. Through the babble, I yelled as loudly and as forcefully as I could, "Ladies and gentlemen, please listen to me. Clear the aisle. I have to get to the front of the coach." I don't know if it was the authority in my voice or my uniform, but the people, stunned and bewildered, parted like the Red Sea before Moses. I ran to the front door of the coach, which was hanging half off of what was left of the bridge, and looked through the shattered window at a scene straight from Dante's Inferno. Fog and fire were everywhere. I took in the entire scene. People floated in the water or stood on sunken debris. I thought to myself, dear God, show me what to do first. I thought the rest of the bridge might collapse. So I yelled to a group of people below to clear the area under the coach and swim to the north side of the bridge. I knew I had to get to the water. As I turned to the people still behind me in the coach, I said, listen up. We're going to do this just like a high school fire drill. I want everyone to file out of the rear, starting here in the front to relieve the center of the car from the weight. Please move quickly and follow the directions of the attendant at the rear. They quickly followed behind each other, still numb from disbelief. Some cried softly. Some asked me what happened. I honestly couldn't tell them because I still could not comprehend what had taken place. I called DK on the radio and told him what I saw. I said, bro, we're in deep trouble. Call everyone you can get, including the Coast Guard. DK asked if I could see the engines. He was worried about the engineers. I told him that I could, but not the fronts. I didn't have the heart to tell him what I already knew. From the massive flames and the jumble of steel, unless the engineers were thrown clear by the initial impact, they were gone. It was a heartbreaking moment. Meanwhile, DK, cool under fire, organized the rescue operation at the rear of the train. We evacuated everyone from what was left of the train to the embankment at the rear. Help was on the way. After the train was cleared, I crawled through the wreckage on the bridge to the end. In the middle of the bayou as I directed people toward the bank with my flashlight. I looked at the coach that had landed in the water. It was starting to sink. I saw people's hands pressing against the inside of the windows, frantically trying to push or break the glass. Why aren't they coming out the back door, which was still above the water, I thought. Then I recalled the door that we forced open in the first coach. Dear God, I thought, it won't open. I took off my shoes, told DK that I would be off the radio, and dove into the murky water, hoping I wouldn't hit a submerged object. As I frantically swam toward the rear door of the coach, I realized I was in a race against time. I was about 10 feet away when the passenger coach sank below the water, taking 23 men, women, and children with it. I fought back tears of frustration and anger against the powers that be that would allow innocent people to die that way. I swam against the current back to the bridge pilot. I needed the height advantage above the water to see the rest of the people. I finally managed to jump from the remains of the bridge to the deck of a smaller towboat that had just arrived, and from there directed the remainder of the rescue operation in the river. I am proud to say that all the survivors of the initial impact and fire were rescued, either by Amtrak crew members or the crews of the many boats who responded to the call from the Coast Guard. The aftermath. I've encountered Pilot Odom and Captain Stavler many times as we wound our way through one hearing or another. Both were broken men in spirit and physical stature. The first time I saw him, he was a medium-sized man and in good health. Several years later, at yet another trial, he reminded me of a walking dead man, responding only to direct questions and never raising his eyes from the floor. I never saw Stabler again after the National Transportation Safety Board hearings in Mobile. I assume he may be in the same mental state as Odom. I have deep empathy for both men and all who enjoyed that tragic night in the swamps. I have come to realize over the years that it was, after all, an accident, but an accident that impacted a great many lives for a great many years. As for me, the trials are finally over. The settlements have been made, and I have finally been allowed to slip into obscurity once again. Every year since the accident, I borrow a friend's boat, buy a small wreath, and make the journey down the bayous to the bridge at Big Bayou Canot. A granite memorial was placed on the bank near the bridge, and it is here that I sit in these peaceful surroundings and ponder the ways that fate always plays with human lives. I'm amazed how two completely separate sets of circumstances could have come together in such a disastrous way, in such a peaceful place. My life, the lives of the passengers, the crew of the Sunset Limited, and the crew of the Tobo Mavilla are forever entwined and changed by the night of September 22nd, 1993. Wow, very sad, very sad. In case you want to see the picture of it, it is a big bayou train crash back in 1993. Tragic.